December 30th, 1922, the Soviet Union was formed. The Communist Republic consisted of Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and the Transcaucasian Federation and was led by Joseph Stalin. In 1940, the USSR joined World War II and eventually gained Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Post-World War II, the USSR and the US began a Cold War over dominance and power. There was no physical fighting, but they were challenging each other in a weapons race that led to the creation of many powerful nuclear weapons. In 1953, the longtime USSR leader, Stalin, dies, and the beginning of a collapsing nation begins. The country was in shambles with a corrupt economy, ethnic conflicts, and misusage of arms, and the change to improve began with one man.
Glasnost means simply that we, journalists, could write what we wish, and so glasnost reintroduced feedback from the society to the top.
Born on March 2, 1931, Mikhail Gorbachev grew up in southern Russia. As a young adult, he rose higher in the ranks of the Communist Party. After a series of physically unhealthy general secretaries of the Communist Party held power, 54-year-old Gorbachev became General Secretary on March 11, 1985, the highest position in the Soviet Union. It was in 1985 when Mr. Gorbachev first introduced the words perestroika and glasnost to the English-speaking world. Little did Mikhail Gorbachev know that those two words alone would alter the fate of the Soviet Union and the world forever.
The state of the Soviet Union and its society could be described very simply with a phrase used by people across the country. We can't go on living like this any longer.
To most other countries, the USSR was viewed as a powerful and successful country with striving citizens. But between the borders, there was much struggle and internal conflict. Because the country was communist, the government controlled all businesses and money. The government's duty was to collect the profit from the businesses and distribute it back out to the workforce. But as the Cold War started, the government began to keep a large amount of money from the citizens to spend on discovering and creating nuclear weapons. These weapons were not intended to be used at the time, but to show strength and create fear in opposing countries.
I remember very clearly what Gorbachev said at that time. He said, there are two roads we can take. We can either tighten our belts very, very tightly and reduce consumption, which the people will no longer tolerate. Or we can try to diffuse international tension and overcome the disagreement between East and West, and so free up the gigantic sums that are spent on armaments in the Soviet Union.
However, this money kept by the government created a great economic depression. There was an incredible lack of resources leading to poverty, starvation, and an overall lower standard of living. The citizens did not have the freedom of speech to speak out against the corrupt government to recognize their struggle. Once Gorbachev was put into office, his goal was to stop or remove the USSR from the Cold War and replenish the country. He understood and recognized the problems in the government and wanted to improve the lives of the people.
И все-таки все то, что мы развернули через реформу, через демократию вот эту, через советы, через трудовые коллективы, через вот эти вещи все, включения, вот это только путь. К этому надо. Там уже вы, власть в натуре будете.
To do this, he needed to decrease the amount of money the government was spending. Once that was accomplished, he wanted to reform the Communist Party by introducing democratic aspects to the government. These were brought forth in 1985 in order to improve the standard of living of Russian citizens. Perestroika was a series of policies that led to economic reform. The said policies allowed for an increase in the independence of businesses within the command economy. The objective was to improve the economy and the standard of living for citizens. The idea of glasnost was that corruption and censorship had to be reduced in order to improve the lives of Russians. The initial introduction of glasnost by Gorbachev started as a small ripple in a pond, which led to the expansion of freedom of speech in the late 1990s. While in office, Gorbachev also worked towards better foreign relations. He was especially close with the U.S. as he became very good friends with the U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Soviet troops were also removed from Afghanistan during his presidency.
The main achievement of Gorbachev's policies was that in the space of a year or two, he made the fear disappear, as if by magic. People had lost their fear of speaking and acting freely.
If I hadn't promoted the reforms, if I hadn't tried to let the people breathe freely, if I hadn't tried to open the door to glasnost and democracy, to stir the society, to get it thinking and acting, I would probably still be in my Secretary General's armchair today. I could have stayed there a lot longer, since I'm still quite young.
Throughout the reforms Gorbachev made, he did not intend for the Soviet Union to fall apart. His new policies allowed people of other nations, such as Lithuania and Belarus, to regain their sense of identity and strive for independence. Mikhail Gorbachev's leadership resulted in the institution of personal freedoms for citizens, as well as democratic aspects in the federal government. The fall of communism and the rise of democracy directly resulted from the adjustments he fought to instill in the USSR. Changes he made were necessary for the well-being of Russian citizens and the development of the nation. Gorbachev's stand for personal freedoms and the well-being of his people caused a domino effect to occur. His actions as leader of the Soviet Union changed the world. He gave the Russian people a voice and a chance to speak their minds. Although he ultimately resigned, his policies of perestroika and glasnost altered the course of Russian history for the better. According to a survey done after Gorbachev's era, 91% of Russians claimed that Gorbachev's removal of troops was positive. 86% claimed that Gorbachev's push to end the Cold War was a positive change as well. 83% claimed that full rehabilitation of the victims of Stalinist repressions was positive and successful as well. 67% claimed that the expansion of glasnost and the freedom of speech, liquidation of censorship, was positive and successful. As Gorbachev's new policies were implemented in the government of the USSR, many countries began to use their new democratic freedoms to speak out on their opinions. Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and other members of the Soviet Union were pleased with the new changes of the Soviet Union, but still wished to become independent and run a separate country how they pleased. The separate nations elected their own individual presidents. Although Gorbachev was still in power, it was hard for the countries to split power between their own presidents and Gorbachev. Gorbachev realized that his power was very limited and was frustrated with trying to fight for power, and he also wanted to avoid a civil war.
There was a kind of sadness. The finality of it hit me pretty hard, and it was Christmas time and holiday time. And I felt that a friend was hurt, and I wasn't happy about that.
Although Gorbachev did not intend for the Soviet Union to dissolve, his policies and reforms led to the people having a voice. His stand for freedom of speech and democracy changed not only the Soviet Union, but the world.